Okay, we're going to begin with a little bit of meditation in terms of quiet our mind and to create a positive motivation, as we've done before. So sit comfortably. I have to put my legs in a certain position here so that I can keep my back erect, and place your attention, first of all, on your breathing. And once you've noticed it, you can call that mindfulness, because mindfulness is a mental factor that takes an object that has already been realized and keeps it in mind. So the first instant, you haven't realized it yet, you haven't watched your breathing. So be mindful of your breathing. You're breathing in when it changes direction, breathing out. Let go of every other activity of your mental consciousness if you can. And then let go of your mindfulness of the breathing and place your attention and subsequent mindfulness on the nature of your mental consciousness. Sometimes it helps to imagine breathing in one last time and imagine it going up to the crown of your head, down to your heart chakra area. Withdrawing your attention away from your eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body consciousness. And in sequence, recognizing the contents of your mind, whether it be emotional states or thoughts, words, conversation, inner conversation, images, like clouds in the otherwise clear spaciousness of your mind. Just focusing generally on that spaciousness between the thoughts, around the images and so forth, recognizing their presence is indicative of the fact that the mind is unobstructing. Let go of the attention to those objective thoughts and focus instead on the subjective mind that has known them, the subjective mind within which, the nature of which they are emerging, just that clear light nature of the mind. This is something that we know conceptually at first. The mind lacks this any nature of obstruction to the thoughts and images. Even the emotional states that might be present, even their seeds are not of the nature of the mind, even their imprints, they can all be removed from the mind. Let go of your sense of the presence of your body. Even the sense of an observer, that yourself, the observer of the mind, that's different than the mind itself. Let go of that. Let go of your mental image or your idea of this spaciousness of the mind, which is as yet just an image of it, not the actual thing. Try to perceive, dive into that spaciousness of the mind as though you were perceiving it directly. Whatever faults we may think we have, imagining them as inherent to us is a mistaken idea. The nature of the mind shows us that we can eliminate all the faults, and inversely, we can develop all the qualities that we as yet do not have and enhance the ones that we have begun to develop. Think that the opportunity of recognizing this right now, this potential, our conventional Buddha nature, the conventional clear light nature of the mind, is a result of having been born with a life of leisure and endowment, having met the Dharma, heard the teachings, have an interest to pursue that, not just discarding it out of hand. And that this opportunity has a time stamp on it, an expiry date, which we don't know when we are going to die. But to think, I'm going to use this life of leisure and endowment this morning to listen to the teachings on the presentation of the Buddhist teachings on philosophy and the philosophical schools as a means to get closer to developing renunciation, bodhicitta, especially the view of emptiness, not just to have a certificate or to brandish our knowledge at cocktail parties or something, but to become a real example of the fruit of Buddhism, realization, to become a better person for the sake of all sentient beings, leaving imprints to continue in future lifetimes in the Bodhisattva path, and to achieve ultimately the state of omniscience, from which we can effortlessly and spontaneously affect the welfare of all sentient beings, leading them to that very same state without error, knowing all the paths that lead from one state to another. I'm going to participate this morning for the ultimate purpose, ultimate aim of achieving enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings and leading every sentient being into that very same state. It's called motivation. And then rising from that, we'll do a little prayer as Manjushri, in direct appearance to Lama Tsongkhapa, advised him that there were, in order to make realizations, there were certain important things to do. You had to purify negative karma, through confession and so forth, and other means, accumulate merit, great store of merit, and pray to our gurus as if they were the embodiment of the Buddhas to receive blessings. So we're going to pray to our guru, whether it be the Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, or Guru Shakyamuni Buddha himself, you can think of as your guru. We're going to think of them as the embodiment of the definitive Manjushri, the wisdom of omniscience, the wisdom that realizes the ultimate nature of phenomena. Homage to my guru and protector, Venerable Manjushri, who holds at his heart a scripture, the Prajnaparamita Sutra, symbolic of seeing all as it is, whose pure genius shines like the sun, unclouded by the two obscurations, who with compassion like a father for his only child, teaches with 60-fold eloquence all beings imprisoned in cyclic existence, groping in the darkness of ignorance and overwhelmed by suffering. You whose thunder-like proclamation of the perfection of wisdom arouses us from the stupor of our afflictions and frees us from the iron chains of karma, who wields wisdom's sword, vanquishing the darkness of ignorance, hewing down every sprout of suffering. You who are primordially pure, who has finished the 10 grounds, the complete embodiment of every excellence, whose princely body is graced with 112 adornments. O Manjushri, to you I bow. Please dispel the darkness of our minds. And then we'll recite 21 times the mantra of red, yellow Manjushri, Om Arapatsanadi. There are other mantras, like white Manjushri, Om Vagidam Nama, and so forth, at the end of which you would recite 108 times. Here, Om Arapatsanadi, we recite 21 times, and imagining the syllable D at the tip of our tongue, we recite then on one breath, D, 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 108 times. Swallow that saliva down to our heart and let the blessings of the quick wisdom of Manjushri enter our mind. Om Arabazanari, 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 and then arise from that. And relax your mind. Any observations as we've done that meditation and praise several times? Any observations about that, or some outside questions? Oh, look who's outside, David and Karen. Hi. Okay. So Bob.
Yeah, if there's no other questions, our SPC at our center, Shanka, asked me to make a request to the students, and it's a simple one. There are plans for a follow-up course on this course for, I think Shanka called it Minds and Cognitions, that Venerable George is going to teach. And Shanka was thinking that instead of having this, at least in Santa Fe, so in Santa Fe, this is Friday mornings at 10 a.m. All of you are all over the world, so it could be any time for you. But anyway, Shanka was thinking that in order to make this BP program more accessible to more people, he was thinking of perhaps moving it to Saturday morning. So in Santa Fe, it would be Saturday morning from 10 to 12. And he wanted just feedback from the students. And that also includes any of you. I mean, many of these students watch these classes on YouTube, and you can access, in fact, if you don't know that, you can access all of these classes on YouTube. They're all available. All of TNL's classes are on YouTube. So if you could send a chat message to me or Stephen, just indicating if you have any preference, whether if you think that this Friday morning slot is better for you, or if you would prefer a Saturday morning slot, that would be helpful for Shanka. Because Shanka is just trying to be more welcoming, to make it possible for more students to be able to attend these classes live, where you can ask questions. And it can go either way. I mean, for some people, weekends are very busy and they don't have time. For other people, they're working, and so these classes are difficult during the day. Of course, some of you are in different time zones, so maybe it's at night. But anyway, if you could just either send a text, or if you could send an email to the TNL Center, if you're listening to these things on YouTube, and just indicate if you have some preference. So that would be very helpful for Shanka for trying to figure out what is the way to make this class most accessible for the most number of people. So thank you. That's all.
Shanka had also mentioned to me that he was hoping to be able to attend live. He works during these hours on his job, so he had a vested interest in Saturday also. So there was one question that was sent to me from Donnie, who doesn't seem to be here. Does Donnie? I thought Donnie came to our talks. Maybe she's listening to them on YouTube these days. But she had asked about a particular. Let me call up here what her thing was. She had asked about a statement that she'd read You can still see me, right? I can't see you. Where is it here? Here it is. So she said, in Meditation on Emptiness, on page 441, the text by Jeffrey Hopkins, at least in her digital version, it says, the most difficult point in the Prasangika system is this: the utter unfindability of phenomena in their bases of designation. You can't find the object anywhere within the, the parts that you are calling something. Say if you talk about the person, the basis of designation are the 5 aggregates: the body, the mind, mental, the mental factors, feeling, discrimination, and so forth. The utter unfindability of phenomena in their bases of designation, and yet their ability to perform functions. And then she said, he continues, the most difficult point in the Prasangika system is this. That part about, and then he says, Prasangikas do not deny the bhava, or ngobo, which is defined as that which is able to perform a function. Usually when we talk about things, the word that we use is a Sanskrit word, bhava, which the Tibetans say ngobo. So we say things are a thing is that which is able to perform a function. Say the Satrantika, so that's one sense of bhava. So Prasangikas do not deny the functioning thing, ngopo, the bhava, which is defined as that which is able to perform a function, particularly the function of creating an effect. So they say that phenomena, even though they can't be found anywhere, they're just imputations of mind, they're still able to perform functions. The non-dependence of things on their parts, their bases of designation, they deny the bhava, which means inherent existence, which is svabhava, self nature, rangshin. They deny the non-dependence of things on their parts. Everything depends on their parts, Prasangikas says. They deny the non-dependence on their bases of designation or the consciousness that designates them. Thus, when emptiness of inherent existence is rightly seen in an object, understanding of imputed existence is furthered. Anyway, she's a longer quote there. She says, my question to you is this. Well, she says, not the class, but how do you interpret the most difficult point? Who was or is it difficult for? Why is this difficult? This is the most difficult point, right? The current readers, or in some other way, may be difficult for the schools to reconcile amongst themselves, difficult for historians, for instance. She says, I don't find it difficult. Okay, so I want to address that. So let me see, how can I get everyone back here again? Can you see me?
Yes.
Yes, I can't. I've lost the view of everyone here. Oh, I see. Exit minimal view. Okay, here we go. So this is reminiscent of a verse in the Lama Chopa, the Guru Puja, which, if you're interested, I'm teaching the glance meditation of that on Thursdays for Shantideva Center in New York City. And those are also up on YouTube. But in the section on the 6 perfections, the first Panchen Lama, who wrote this Lama Chopa, Guru Puja, he says, Korde Rangshin Dusam Mebadang, Yude Tendalua Mebani, Pensum Gelme Joksu Chawayi, Ludup Gondong, Tokbar Jingilo. This is the last verse about the perfection of wisdom. And it's saying, essentially, there doesn't exist even the slightest particle, atom of inherent existence within cyclic existence or nirvana. nowhere, essentially everywhere could be defined as, cyclic existence and beyond cyclic existence, which is what we call nirvana. There doesn't exist even the slightest particle of an inherent existence of anything. Yet, the pair, yet Yude Tendel Lua Mebani, the fact that dependent arising of cause and effect, Yude means cause and effect, Tendel means dependent arising, is infallible. That means things will always have some result. If you create a cause, a functioning thing always will have a result. These two, please grant me blessings to see these two as arising without contradiction, because generally when we think of emptiness, the non-inherent existence of phenomena, we're thinking of space-like meditation on emptiness. Nothing appears. And at that point, maybe we have some confidence in emptiness, but then when we open our eyes and we see things appearing to us and things apparently functioning, it becomes difficult to understand how they can function if they are lacking any inherent existence. So it says, please grant me blessings to realize the intended meaning of Nagarjuna, which is the founder of the Prasangika school, that the fact that these two, that there's not an atom of inherent existence in cyclic existence or nirvana, and that yet that the law of cause and effect, dependent arising, is infallible. Grant me blessings to see them as not contradictory, but actually aiding one another, appearing as mutually supportive of one another. So that's the same thing that Donnie's question was talking about. So this is, although she made a strong, heroic statement that I don't find it difficult, but that is said to be the most, the most difficult point to reconcile in the Prasangika system. Svatantruka, which we're still talking about right now, says that you can find things within their objects, within their bases of designation. So they're much different than the more subtle view of the Prasangika. So I just wanted to say that for Donnie's sake, although she's not here, hope she watches it on YouTube. So last time we had gotten on up to the point in the autonomy school, the Svatantruka Madhyamaka, I think on page 22, number 5, the way of asserting object possessors. Is that right? Okay, Bob says, yeah. So here it says, the mental consciousness is asserted to be an illustration of the person. So of the Svatantrukas, remember there are two subdivisions of Svatantruka. Those that follow more the Satrantika, the Hinayana school. Remember Vaibhashika Satrantika? So some of the Svatantrukas posit things like that. They're called the Satrantika Svatantruka Madhyamaka. And then there are some Svatantrukas who posit a little bit like, they have a lot of similarities to the Yogacara, the Chittamatra school, mind only, especially in that they talk about the fact that there is no external objects. The Satrantika Svatantrukas say there are external objects. The Chittamatrans and the Yogacara Svatantrukas say that there are no external objects that are of a different nature from the mind. So those two sections, yet generally in Chittamatra and Yogacara, they say the example of the person is the alaya alaya vijnana, the fundamental foundation consciousness. Here, of the Svatantrukas, even the Yogacara Svatantrukas, they both say that the example, an illustration of the person is the mental consciousness. So there's no difference there between the two. All of the Svatantrukas posit the mental consciousness to be the illustration of the person. They assert the 6 collections of consciousness. That means, like most of the schools, other than the Chittamatras, the Chittamatrans following scripture, let's say following a Sangha, they talk about 2 extra consciousnesses, remember, the foundation consciousness, the alaya vijnana, and they talk about the distorted consciousness that grasps the alaya vijnana as a person. So here, all of the Svatantrukas assert 6 consciousnesses, just the regular 6 consciousnesses. What are they? Eye, ear, nose, tongue, tactile, and mental. So there's no difference between them there. They assert 2 kinds of awarenesses, valid cognizers and non-valid cognizers. Remember when we talked about valid cognizers earlier, although the Vaibhashika don't, they may not have an explicit expression of it, they usually, all of the lower schools accept that a valid cognizer has to be new and infallible. It has to realize its object it actually has to realize its object, and it has to be fresh. So here it says there are 2 kinds of awareness, 2 kinds of consciousnesses, valid cognizers and non-valid cognizers, like everyone else. There are 2 types of valid cognizers, direct valid cognizers and inferential valid cognizers. So remember, a valid cognizer is something that realizes its object, has eliminated superimpositions with respect to it, has gotten to its actual meaning. And a valid cognizer also is the first instant of that realization. Subsequent incidents, subsequent moments of that are called subsequent cognizers, and they're not called valid for those lower schools and this school. So we can realize things validly with our sense consciousnesses. So see blue or a tree or a mountain. The first instant of that can be a valid cognizer. And then we can know things, we can realize things with our mental consciousness through inference. Well, we can also have direct valid cognizers with the mind. We can realize things for Svatantrika. We can realize with yogic direct perception emptiness. Okay, we can have that also. But the main way that the mind knows is realizes objects is through inference, an inferential valid cognizer. So the Sutra middle way autonomists, that is the Satrantika Svatantruka Madhyamikas, do not assert self-knowing direct perceivers. Remember when we talked about direct perceivers, we talked about sense direct perceivers, mental direct perceivers, self-knowing direct perceivers, and yogic direct perceivers. So the Satrantika Svatantrukas do not accept Rangrik self-knowers. The only people who accept self-knowers are essentially the Satrantikas and the Yogacara Svatantrukas. I'm sorry, what did I say? The Satrantikas, Chittamatrans, and the Yogacara Svatantrukas. So here, the Sutra Middle Way Autonomists do not assert self-knowers. They don't accept that they exist. They're like the Prasangikas and the Vaibhashikas. And the Yogic Middle Way Autonomists, the Yogacara Svatantrukas, assert 4 types of mental perceivers, like we talked about, of direct perceivers: self-knowing, direct, yogic. Of those 4, self-knowing direct perceivers and yogic direct perceivers are necessarily non-mistaken consciousnesses, while the other 2, wait a second, what does it say here? Self-knowing direct perceivers, yogic direct perceivers are necessarily non-mistaken. So yogic direct perceivers, for them, as they're knowing the ultimate nature of phenomena, they are non-mistaken. They realize their object in a non-mistaken way. While the other 2, sense direct perceivers and mental direct perceivers, can either be mistaken or non-mistaken. So I have a question for you. Who's the one who likes? I see a lot of people whose photos are not there. I'm not sure why. They're sleeping. So how can it be that sense direct perceivers for the Yogacaras Svatantrukas, sense direct perceivers can be mistaken or non-mistaken? Anyone have an idea? Rowena, you following?
I'm following you, but this was where I once had a little difficulty. Your senses are imbued with considerations from past karma. Would that affect any of this, or are we going even below that level? Just such basic, like, I see light, kind of consciousness. Which are we talking about here?
Well, we're not talking, here we're saying, we're just talking about direct perceivers. We've gone from the most precise ones, valid direct perceivers, now just to direct perceivers themselves. So I direct perceiver isn't necessarily non-mistaken. There are, for instance, if you see a snow mountain while you have jaundice, because of the bile in your system, the snow mountain, which should look white, may appear to be yellow, and that's called a mistake. That's a mistaken consciousness. It's a direct perceiver that is mistaken. Also, if you have a torch, a sparkler when you're a kid and you twirl it around and it looks like a circle because it's moving so rapidly, that's also called a mistaken direct perceiver, in that there isn't really a circle of light out there. Your mind, your eye consciousness has some, the lag of that. Same thing that happens in motion pictures, right? That there's a sequence of events, a sequence of individual frames that come, and you see them as a continuum. So there can be sense direct perceivers can be unmistaken, like seeing blue as blue, seeing a tree as a tree. There are sense direct perceivers that can be mistaken also, when there's a cause of mistake. Mental direct perceivers can either be mistaken or non-mistaken. You can give an easy explanation, say that the first instant after having seen you've twirled the sparkler around or the torch around, and it looks like a circle. The mental consciousness has an apprehension of that, and that is a mental direct perceiver. That could be called also mistaken. Maybe some other examples you can think about. If you think of something, we talk next time. Just easy one. So then proponents of sutra and the proponents of mind only, that is the Satrantikas, the Chittamatrans, and the Svatantrukas, all accept the following. What is there? 5 propositions here. A direct perceiver is necessarily a consciousness free from conceptuality. That seems like a no-brainer, right? Direct perceiver is necessarily a consciousness free from conceptuality. See who's been left off that list of who accept this. Starts with Satrantika, Chittamatra, and Svatantruka. So who's left off that list? Oh, Vaibhashika is below Satrantika, right? And Prasangika is above Svatantruka. Yeah. So they don't necessarily accept this first statement. Why? Let's say for a Vaibhashika, why would you say, why would you disagree if I said a direct perceiver is necessarily a consciousness free from conceptuality? Oh, Jeremy, what do you think? Coming up with an egg, what are they? A 0. Okay. How about Emily? Emily, are you still there? Maybe she's still making tea. Okay, I thought she. Karen? Why would the Vaibhashikas not accept that statement? A direct perceiver is necessarily, must be a consciousness free from conceptuality. She's thinking, it's coming up also with a mustache. I'm not sure what she's saying.
Isn't there a difference in terms of just that they believe that we only realize something through conception, not through the senses?
Oh, no. They say usually the senses are giving, the direct perceivers are given prominence, and that's how we really know things.
Oh, I'm confusing them with the
yeah. So, Bob, you know.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's, I mean, it is funny because I normally think of direct perceivers as being non-conceptual. Although one thing that's always confused me about perception is, again, this notion of whether perception is bare perception or involves some recognition of the object. For example, when I see a table, you know, I just have the bare perception of the brownness or whatever. And then later on, I think about it and I think about the table and all its features and so forth. So, you know, they always talk about sort of having bare perception followed by conceptuality. And so how much do you know about an object when you, you know, is there any conception involved when you actually have direct perception, or is direct perception only bare?
So direct perception has no conceptuality. That part's not in question here. The word for the Vaibhashikas, the word that is operative here is necessarily a consciousness. Does that give you a clue? Remember, for the Vaibhashikas, they said that the direct perceivers were of 2 kinds. The eye, let's say eye direct perceiver was eye consciousness, and also the eye organ faculty, which is that subtle matter within the eye that acts as an interface between the object and the consciousness. So for Vaibhashika, they would disagree with this because they accept that sense faculties also can be direct perceivers. All of the other schools say that's, oh, get out of the room, you know, close your mouth, get out of here. That's ridiculous. Okay, but that's a Vaibhashika. So they wouldn't accept that. Why would the Prasangika not accept that? A direct perceiver is necessarily a consciousness free from conceptuality? Anyone know? Oh, I was hoping Emily, I thought Emily might be more, she said she's been teaching this for some time. I thought she might know. Bob, do you know? Rowanna's thinking. Nadine is looking down as though she doesn't want me to call on her. I can't see. Oh, there's Emily. Emily, why would Prasangika not accept that?
Hi, Venerable George. Sorry, I have to sit far away from the computer, so it's hard for me to respond.
Oh.
So my understanding is Prasangikas don't accept it because they accept conceptual direct perceivers. For example, a conceptual subsequent cognizer induced by a direct perceiver.
So they accept a conceptual subsequent cognizer. Can you elaborate? So usually if you have a mental, let's say a yogic direct perception of emptiness, that's a mental consciousness that's knowing it based on union of Shine and Lactone, of tranquil abiding and penetrative insight, right? You've realized emptiness. You're saying that the Prasangikas say that subsequent to that, you can have a conceptual, generally when you have a direct perception of emptiness, there's no conception at all, right?
Right.
So what are you, maybe elaborate a little on that. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I wasn't thinking about the yogic direct perceiver. I was thinking more in terms of, let's say, an eye consciousness perceiving, let's say, the tree.
Right.
Right. So that's a sense direct perceiver. And then there's a conceptual consciousness that labels the tree. I think that Prasangikas would consider that conceptual consciousness labeling the tree a direct perceiver, a conceptual direct perceiver, right? So Trijang would say it's a conceptual subsequent cognizer, but subsequent cognizers are non-conceptual subsequent cognizers are direct perceivers.
You're getting to the point pretty close, but I didn't quite catch your last little addition there. So you're saying you see something with your eye consciousness,
Correct.
a tree. Then we're not talking about yogic direct perceivers or anything in your example. So you're talking about this subsequent to that, the mental consciousness, first of all, has an instant of direct perception of that, but it has a conceptual understanding of that. Doesn't necessarily have to be the labeling part of the conception, but it can be. And so from there, why is that a direct perceiver for Prasangika?
Well, if it's so it's a conceptual, right? So it's a conceptual consciousness realizing that object, right? Right, that tree. And if it's a consciousness that realizes the object, right, it needs to be a valid cognizer, right? And it's not an inferential valid cognizer, so it has to be a direct valid cognizer, correct? Which makes it a direct perceiver.
So why do you say that has why do you say that has realized its object?
Well, if you, let's say, realize, right, you realize the object, like if you're not just correctly assuming that that's a tree, like you realize you remove any superimpositions that it's not a tree. Right? You have no doubt, you realize that it's a tree. Mm-hmm. Right? If somebody comes to you and says, oh, you didn't see a tree, you don't have any doubt at all, right? I mean, you saw a tree, right? And so this is something that I've been kind of pondering for a while. So that's my current conclusion is that that would be a realizing consciousness, not just a correct assumption. I mean, it could be a correctly assumed consciousness, but I think you can have realizing consciousnesses, you know, conceptual realizing consciousnesses. They're not inferences.
Okay, I think you're getting to a point. These 5 points are not accepted by the Vaibhashika or the Prasangika. So if you're interested in knowing more about these things, there is a very useful book Bob must have on his shelf. You have this book, Bob? The unique tenets of the Prasangika, so the middle way consequence school by Daniel Kosort, a very good scholar, one of Jeffrey Hopkins. So in there, you would find some explanation about these. In general, Prasangika accepts that you can have a conceptual direct perception. And right now, I'm just going to go through this list and give a little bit of introduction. And then when we get to the Prasangika, I will explain a little bit more. Okay, right now, you know, sort of weigh what Emily has said and see, you know, if you talk about usually we would say that the conceptual, you know, the consciousness, the mental consciousness that's knowing the tree is a conceptual consciousness. And you wouldn't say that generally you would say that is not a direct perceiver because it's dealing with conceptuality. So Emily, think about that a little bit. Generally, that if it's a conceptual mind, it's going to be with conceptuality, right? You're knowing something, you're knowing the tree by means of a mental image of that. And you can realize that tree as a result of that. It doesn't have to be an inferential valid cognizer. You can realize it just through the mental image of that. You can know your mother's face and so forth. So let's leave that. So this, for the Satrantikas, Chittamatra, and the Svatantrukas, a direct perceiver is necessarily a consciousness. That excludes the Vaibhashikas, who say that it could be a sense power, and is necessarily free from conceptuality. So there's some implication here that the Prasangika says that conceptual consciousnesses, certain conceptual consciousnesses can be direct perceivers. Generally, it has to be free of that. So second statement here, a subsequent cognizer is necessarily a consciousness that is not a valid cognizer. Subsequent cognizer is necessarily a consciousness that is not a valid cognizer. So from the Prasangika point of view, we will see again, you know, generally we talk about subsequent cognition is not a valid cognizer because it's not fresh. Valid cognizer has to be the first moment of something. Here, in the Prasangika, which we're going to talk about next, pramana, which is the Sanskrit word that we're translating here as valid cognizer. Oh, no, valid. We're translating as valid. Pramana. Pra means, it doesn't necessarily mean fresh like the lower schools believe. Pra means that you've gotten to the main object. So subsequent cognizers, once the first instant is realized something by itself, the subsequent moments of that train of consciousness, whether it be conceptual or non-conceptual, are also realizing consciousnesses, and they could qualify for the Prasangika. They can be pramana, they can be valid cognizers, we're translating here. Subsequent cognize. So all of the schools below, other than the Vaibhashika, say that it is not a valid cognizer. I'm not sure why who knows? Why did the Vaibhashikas say that a subsequent cognizer can be a valid cognizer? Or is it that that extra word there, consciousness, subsequent, so a subsequent moment of I faculty, right, which is not a consciousness, that can eliminate that for them also, right? You follow what I mean? Maybe I didn't make clear. Karen, Bob.
I mean, I actually have a question about this.
Do you?
Based on sort of what you're saying also, is you're saying, I mean, it's always, actually, that goes the other way for me. I mean, it's always, to me, seemed very strange that they require this, that they have this freshness requirement. To me, that seems extraordinarily weird. And based on what you were saying, you seem to be suggesting that it's some sort of funny etymological reason, that they're looking at the word pramana, and they are, from an etymological reason, coming up with this requirement for being fresh. Whereas, you know, I think the pramana theory came up later, from after the Vaibhashika. Dharmakirti and Dignaga and all these people came up much later, you know, long after the Vaibhashika theory had been formulated. So if this notion of an etymological reason for freshness is true, then in that case, there would be no reason for the Vaibhashika to require freshness, because they don't have any of this etymology stuff that only came up later with Dignaga and Dharmakirti and the Indian philosophers who came up with pramana theory.
Well, I think that predated, is that the right word? Dignaga and Dharmakirti about the meaning of pramana, because even in the Indian schools, they talk about pramana having, you know, having their own understanding of it. Generally, their understanding that we understood from Satrantika and so forth, that the first instant of a cognition, a direct perception, let's say, is has more power than the subsequent moments, which are like the subsequent cars of a train, you know, let's say a train of thought or a train of perception. The subsequent moments are no longer autonomously able to know that object. They are due to the first instant, which is the valid thing.
But does that make any sense? I mean, to me, that's absolutely, you know, when I look at something, if I validly see it, even if it's a subsequent moment, I validly see it. Right. I mean, I get the image of the train and so forth, but to me, it's, you know, it just doesn't coincide with my experience.
Right. Well, if you can conjure up Dharmakirti and Dignaga to argue with, you can argue with them. This is that in the Pramana school, the Pramanavartika and all of these, they talk about the first instant as having this special quality of freshness, and by its own force, it has realized the objects. So the second moment and the third moment are not realizing it by their own force. They still realize it. If the first moment realizes it, the second and third moments realize it, but they are no longer, they aren't called valid, or we're using valid here. What is the other way that people translate pramana? Someone know? Okay, no one knows. Let me.
Prime cognition.
Prime cognition and valid cognition. So, thank you. So the first instant is called valid or prime. Prime more accords with the sense of being fresh, right? Like prime beef or something like that. The other ones, when you say valid, it still means that they are subsequent cognition is not a valid cognizer because it's not fresh. So Tenzin Jiangshub has his hand up, or her hand up, I can't remember. Tenzin?
Yeah, so your question, we were talking about why maybe the Vaibhashikas don't accept the same instance of needing to be fresh as valid. And my understanding is a little bit, and I've checked in the maps of the profound, and I was thinking, because Vaibhashikas have this unique interpretation of time as it relates to particulars. And so my thought was, if Vaibhashikas assert that particulars of objects are existence, and they also have this unique relationship that the past and the present and the future of an existent is a specific particular of that existent. And that, to me, would be a reason why they are at variance with this statement that a subsequent cognizer is not valid, because they would say it's valid in three ways. It's valid in the past, it's valid in the present, and it's valid in the future, as three specific instances of being valid as an existent.
That's pretty deep. I'm not sure. My understanding of this is the same as for the first point, when we said a direct perceiver is necessarily a consciousness free from conceptuality. The Vaibhashikas would accept that it has to be free from conceptuality, but they wouldn't necessarily accept that it has to be a consciousness, because the sense faculties can be direct perceivers. So I think the same thing occurs here, why the Vaibhashikas don't necessarily accept that, or do not accept that. A subsequent cognizer, let's say the I faculty, the second moment, third moment of an I faculty also could be, say, a subsequent cognizer is, so the other schools say a subsequent cognizer must be necessarily a consciousness that is not a valid cognizer. So they would, if they were to talk about valid cognizers at all, they wouldn't quibble with the fact that the subsequent moments are not valid cognizers. They would say that the subsequent moments they can be subsequent moments of a sense faculty realizing something. So that's not necessarily a valid cognizer. The sense faculty is not necessarily a consciousness. Okay, anyway, think about these. These are subtle points that Jesunpa has put here as not necessarily, you don't necessarily find in the commentaries that the Gelugpa Geshes, our FPMT Geshes wrote, that we have up on our site. None of them answered these very clearly. In fact, some of them just skipped them over completely. Have you noticed that, Bob? Did you read something? Yeah. So they're not easy questions to answer. Third one, a consciousness that is mistaken with respect to its determined object is necessarily a wrong consciousness. So we can say the majority of people say this. Only exceptions are the Vaibhashika and the Prasangika. A consciousness that is mistaken with respect to its determined object is necessarily a wrong consciousness. So what does that mean? So while we were waiting to start recording, Stephen had asked some question about these different kinds of names of objects. So what were the lists that you gave, Stephen? You wanted to know.
So appearing,
appearing object,
engaged object,
engaged object,
then determined object, and
Determined-
established object.
established object. I think you said referent object, didn't you say?
No, I said established. It's on this page somewhere. Let's see if I can find it.
Established object. It's on page 22. Okay, well, while he's looking, let me explain. Maybe he wants to hear anyway. So when we talk about an appearing object, we can talk about the appearing object to perception. You know, there's 5 senses, the mental consciousness, and the appearing object to conception. The appearing object of direct perceivers is the actual object that you're engaging with. Let's say the tree or the blue or something like that. They will be the same, the appearing object and the engaged object, the object that you are understanding for a direct perceiver. When you talk about conception, the appearing object is the generic image, is the mental image. We say the dunshi, the meaning generality of that. And you are knowing, let's say you're knowing your mother's face, which is something that, you know, it said that you are knowing it, but it's not in a sense, you could say it's appearing to you, but in general, it's not the main appearing object. The main appearing object is the mental image of your mother's face. And it's as though you are knowing your mother's face via that appearing object. You don't focus on the appearing object. It's like the example of the, looking at the Eiffel Tower and so forth with one of those old-fashioned gadgets. You saw your 2 eyes look through some little color image of the Eiffel Tower that are slightly askew so that you get some vision that is off in the distance there. You're not focusing on that little piece of colored negative or positive. You are through that, you are knowing that the Eiffel Tower. So appearing objects are different depending on what you're talking about. The appearing object to conception is a mental image. The appearing object to perception is the object that you're engaging with. So then we talk, yeah, Bob.
See, I've forgotten, is the middle way, do they also use these akaras, these
Aspects?
aspects? Yeah, because if they're using the aspects again, if your direct perceiver is only looking at the aspect, is that the same thing as looking at the real object?
Well, I think we talked about this once before. For the the schools, they say that suffices, as opposed to the Vaibhashika that says this eye consciousness goes out to the object, right? Which other schools say that, again, get out of the room. You've had too much to drink. The other schools accept that let's say when you're looking at something, an aspect of the object is focused on your retina, in this case, on the eye faculty, and that realizing that is appearing to your eye consciousness, and that suffices to say that you are apprehending the object itself. They say that, don't worry about that. So here we're talking about appearing objects, engaged objects is another term. Another term is determined object. So what is a determined object? When you talk about the Tibetan is shenyul. Shenpa, you could say determined, or determined maybe is a good idea. It is always a conception. Only conceptions have determined objects. Determined object of conception is the object that you are realizing, not the mental image of your mother's face, but your mother's face itself. That is said to be the determined object for conception. Did you find established object on that page? You'd
No, I
usually-
didn't. I was wrong about that, Venerable George. I should have said observed object.
Observed object. Okay, so that's what I was calling referent object. So mikul, mik here doesn't, there's a word that we say I in Tibetan, mik, that's spelled differently. Mik here is like in the mantra of Lama Tsongkhapa, mik me se wei ter chen chen rezi. Do you know that mantra? Some of you do. Bob, do you know that? You're more of a philosopher, not so much. Moena, you know that mantra, mik me se wei. So mik me means, mik means observed or referent. Mik me means non-referential or non-observed. So mik me sewe, sewa is another word for compassion, actually means mercy, synonym of compassion. So it's non-referential compassion. So that what that means is that a compassion within the continuum of an Arya Bodhisattva that does not observe or refer to truly existent phenomena. So it means based on an understanding of emptiness, that sentient beings are empty, even the people that are suffering, the sentient beings are empty of being truly existent. The suffering is empty of being truly existent, but still having compassion based on that. That's called non-referential compassion. So when we talk about referent object, what does that mean? If you talk about the selflessness of persons, if you refer to or observe a person, that is called the referent object. And if you conceive of that person as being inherently existent, truly existent, that is your supposed determined object. A determined object, that which you're understanding, has to exist. So it's not a real determined object. It's an imputed determined object. It's what you're knowing through conception. The referent object is the general thing that you're referring to. Usually these two words that Bob was talking about before, also akara, nampa in Tibetan. So nampa and rikpa, and nampa and mikpa mean the mikpa is the general referent. The nampa, the aspect, is how you are apprehending that, in what way you're apprehending that. You're apprehending the person to be inherently existent. The person would be the referent object. The aspect would be inherent existence. For the Prasangika, for the lower schools, the referent object there is, let's say, the collection of the 5 aggregates. For Prasangika, the actual referent object is the conventional I. That's what you're referring to, which does exist, merely imputed I, and you are conceiving of it to be inherently existent. That's the aspect. So when we get to the Prasangika, things change a lot for all of these different terms. So we talk about the Nangyul, the appearing object, the Shenyul, the conceived object. There's one that you left out, a couple. Jukyul means the engaged object. That's for direct perception. That's the object that you're knowing. Determined object is the object that you're knowing in terms of conception. And the mikyul is just the general thing that you're referring to or observing, as opposed to the aspect, the way that you're knowing it, as opposed to that. So here, a consciousness that is mistaken with respect to its determined object. So this is talking about a conceptual mind, right? A consciousness that is mistaken with respect to its determined object is necessarily a wrong consciousness. So here, the determined object is the object that you are understanding. You know, you think that you're understanding. Say, for instance, you are referring, say the referent object is a rabbit with his ears sticking up. But your mind is, you're actually seeing that, but your mind thinks of that as those ears as horns of a rabbit. Your mental consciousness has a conception of that. What's the determined object there? It's the horns of a rabbit, but they're just imputed to be the determined object because they don't really exist, right? A consciousness that is mistaken with respect to its determined object. So if your mind is thinking of the horns of a rabbit, that fits that definition. A consciousness that is mistaken with respect to its determined object is necessarily a wrong consciousness. Does it make sense? Yeah, Stephen.
I have a question here in the chat from Kevin about that. So he says, he refers to what you just instructed us on. And then he says, can you clarify if it would apply, if it would apply, I think we would all have wrong consciousnesses.
Oh, we all have wrong consciousnesses, many kinds of wrong consciousness. Main wrong consciousness is conceptual consciousness, is to perceive an inherently existent I. So that's our determined object, inherently existent I. That's necessarily a wrong consciousness for all of the schools, but not the Prasangika, as we'll see, would not necessarily say that if something is mistaken with respect to its determined object. When I say something, you could say consciousness, because if something has a determined object, it has to be a consciousness. A consciousness that is mistaken with respect to its determined object is necessarily a wrong consciousness. So again, when we get to Prasangika, we'll be talking about whether things appear to be inherently existent, and we can, that's the way that they appear to us. But we can still know them, we can still realize them and not be a wrong consciousness, because we're not focusing on the fact that they're being inherently existent. We're just focusing on the fact that that is an apple, where we have a conception of an apple, and that conception of the apple is a correct consciousness. It's not a wrong consciousness, even though the apple is appearing to be inherently existent. So this, with respect to the mental image, there are some other subtleties here. So let's just say that in general, that makes sense. A consciousness that is mistaken with respect to its determined object is necessarily a wrong consciousness. So Prasangika say, well, it's not necessarily. We'll see why. Then if it is a mistaken consciousness with respect to a phenomenon, okay, with respect to phenomena, if it is a mistaken consciousness, it is necessarily not a valid cognizer with respect to that phenomenon. So the lower, these three schools, Satrantika, Chittamatra, and Svatantruka would say, if with respect to a phenomena, there is a mistaken consciousness, if something is a mistaken consciousness with respect to that, it is necessarily not a valid cognizer with respect to that. Prasangika would say in a similar vein, we'll say in more detail later, something can be mistaken because it's appearing to be inherently existent, but still be a valid cognizer realizing that object. And the last point here, if it is an inferential cognizer, remember what an inferential cognizer is? Mental consciousness due to logical reasoning that has realized something, eliminated the superimpositions about it, is realized it. If it is an inferential cognizer, it is necessarily not a valid cognizer with respect to its appearing object and so forth. So what's its appearing object? Let's say if you're realizing emptiness or selflessness, the appearing object is the mental image. That's its appearing object. So it is not necessarily it is necessarily not a valid cognizer with respect to its appearing object and so on. So as I mentioned in the commentaries, I think there were maybe 4 or 5 Gelugpa FPMT Geshes. None of them really, they sort of skipped over this section. So I'm kind of doing halfway here, sort of just introducing this, and we'll go back when we talk about Prasangika. Although in the Prasangika section of Jesumpa's text here, he doesn't say these 5 explicitly, in the same order here. Some of them are addressed in the Prasangika section. So Tenzin Jangchup has both a hand up and a thumb up.
I don't know how to operate the hand up, so the thumb up was partially a hand up, but
Okay, got it.
It actually gets to I just got confused about what you were just describing, this last point. And so how can they assert, because they assert an inferential valid cognizer can be valid. So how can
who's they?
This is the autonomy school.
Okay.
And we're talking about the way of asserting object possessors, and they say that there can be 2 types of valid cognizers, and one is an inferential valid cognizer.
Right.
But then down below, then they say if it is an inferential cognizer, it's necessarily not a valid cognizer because
with respect to its appearing object. It's a valid cognizer with respect to its determined object. That's like your mother's face, but it's not a valid cognizer with respect to the mental image of your mother's face. You see the difference there? And it is not saying valid also. It's saying if it is an inferential cognizer, it is necessarily not it doesn't say a valid inferential cognizer. It says if it is an inferential cognizer, could be the subsequent moments and so forth. Are the subsequent moments of an inferential cognizer called inferential cognizer? Bob?
I think they would, but they wouldn't be valid cognizers.
No, they're not called inferential cognizers. They're called subsequent cognizers, because an inferential cognizer is the first instant of realizing something with the mental consciousness. That's the inferential cognizer. And the subsequent moments of that are called subsequent cognizers. So it says, if it is an inferential cognizer, it is necessarily not a valid cognizer with respect to its appearing object. So remember, the determined object is the thing that you're determining through conception, that you're knowing. It's equivalent to a sense consciousness, what we call the engaged object, the object that you're engaging. In terms of conception, it's called the determined objects, because it's not appearing to you directly. You're not engaging it directly like in a direct perception. You're knowing it by means of the mental image, the meaning generality. So inferential cognizer is not a valid cognizer with respect to its appearing object and so forth. Okay.
But could you explain why? Because it seems, I see there's a difference between a valid inferential cognizer and an inferential cognizer. but I don't understand. Isn't a valid inferential cognizer also an inferential cognizer?
A valid inferential cognizer is an inferential cognizer, yes.
So what I keep seeing here then is that so it's also saying that if it is an inferential cognizer, so if you have a valid inferential cognizer, this statement is saying it's necessarily not a valid cognizer with respect to the appearing object. So some aspect of that is mistaken by definition, according to what I'm reading.
Right. It doesn't, well, it's not necessarily mistaken. It's necessarily deceived. So there's these two words, mistaken and deceived. For a realizing consciousness, you have to be undeceived. You have to have eliminated all of the superimpositions about something, have actually gotten to it. Mistaken means mistaken for conception. Mistaken means mistaken with respect to the appearing object. What's appearing to your mind, your mental consciousness, is let's say, the appearance of the horns of a rabbit, or the appearance of an inherently existent person. That mental image does exist, but the determined object that you think that you're knowing doesn't exist. An inherently existent person, or the horns of a rabbit, the sons of a barren woman. Have you heard that one before? The children of a barren woman.
Yeah.
A barren woman, by definition, is someone who can't have children. So the son, if you talk about the son of a barren woman, that's another classic example of a non-existent. So that would be like the determined object. The appearing object does exist, but you are not knowing that appearing object, according to these particular schools. If it is an inferential cognizer, you've known something by inference, it is necessarily not a valid cognizer with respect to its appearing object. So here, we're not saying it's not a valid cognizer with respect to its determined object. It can be a valid cognizer. Say, for instance, if you have an inferential cognizer of fire by seeing smoke, that can be a valid cognizer with respect to the existence of fire, right? You see smoke and you infer the existence of fire. That can be a valid cognizer, but it's not a valid cognizer with respect to the appearance, the mental image of smoke in your mind, in your mental consciousness. It's based on actual observation. You see with your eye consciousness smoke, but then when you apply the inference, that's all done in your mental consciousness, which is not thinking, it's not engaging this with direct perception. It's thinking about it. It's using conceptuality, right? So there is a mental image of smoke, and by using the logic that where there is smoke, there is necessarily fire, you infer the existence of fire there. Maybe, there's like I gave the example before, a circular wall that the shepherds have built to use as a receptacle to throw the yak dung or something in, and that catches fire. So there's fire in there, but you don't see the fire because the wall is obscuring you from seeing the flames. The flames are down here. The smoke is coming up, billowing smoke. You see that, maybe even smell that from the distance, and you infer the existence of fire. So that can be a valid cognizer with respect to the existence of fire, but it's not a valid cognizer with respect to the appearing object, to that inferential cognizer. The inferential cognizer, its appearing object is the mental image of smoke. And when you come to the conclusion that it's fire, there'll be a mental image of fire while you're still thinking about that. Does that help, Tenzin?
I think so. I think what I'm understanding is that it takes an extra, it doesn't happen simultaneously. With inferential cognizers, there's a step where you move into the next moment to realize, like if you have a valid cognition of something which is mistaken, you can, with valid cognition, you can, in the next instant, it can be valid, because you're not engaging with the appearing object, you're engaging with a determined object, which is conceptual, but it's correct, I think. But anyway, I'll have to read more and study more about it.
I think the important point here is the last couple of words where it says, with respect to its appearing object. An inferential cognizer is necessarily, or it can be a valid cognizer with respect to its determined object. It can know that, it can be a valid cognizer, but it is not a valid cognition with respect to its appearing object. Okay, let's leave it. Oh yeah, Bob.
Yeah, just one question. I still am struggling also to understand. Are you saying that it's not valid with respect to its appearing object because the appearing object is mistake? Because when we look at the appearing object, we think it's the real object, but it's really not the real object. It's only an image.
Yes, that's in the explanations of when we talk about why conception is mistaken. It's because it mistakes the mental image to be the actual object itself, the appearing object, the mental image. The mental image is the appearing object. So it is mistaken with respect to that, but it is valid, it is undeceived with respect to realizing the existence of fire or the appearance of smoke and so forth. So those two words are important. There's a difference. So Emily did have, I don't know if what was that? You were just applauding our discussion or something? There were some clapped hands there. Oh, she's gone back to her seat. Don't worry, Emily. Stephen, you have a question.
Yeah, this is in the chat again. It's from Kevin. And I think he's just looking for a clarification on the language. He says, it is necessarily not. And then he asks, but can be? So
no,
I think he's asking, is it not necessarily or necessarily?
No. I said it didn't say not necessarily. It says necessarily not. So that means can't be a valid cognizer with respect to its appearing object and so forth. So we'll see again in Prasangika, generally that's not one of the famous points of the Prasangika. Generally there's something like 16 difficult points of the Prasangika that were classical, difficult things to understand that are different from the Prasangika. External objects exist because they are not refuted by conventional analysis, awareness. That refutes the Chittamatra view that external objects are the nature of the mind. There's 16 different things refuting various ideas of the different tenets. And then Lama Tsongkhapa added 2 more, so the 18 difficult points. And then there are a couple of other points coming up to 21 sort of unique tenets of the Prasangika. So that particular point about the mental image and so forth, about the inferential cognizer is necessarily not a valid cognizer with respect to its appearing object. That's kind of clear for the lower tenets, but for the Prasangika, they'll have a different take on that. Okay, so let's go a little bit further. I would like to see if we can finish up this Svatantruka, maybe not. The way of asserting selflessness, or maybe we can say ways of asserting selflessness, because there's several different. The person's emptiness of being permanent, partless, and independent. I'm using the word partless, although unitary maybe fits more with the sort of the Vedic understanding of some kind of being which is unitary, just one, not you don't think of it as parts. It is permanent, partless, and independent. The person's emptiness of being permanent, partless, and independent is asserted to be the coarse selflessness of persons. This is Svatantruka, remember? While the person's emptiness of being self-sufficient, substantially existent, is asserted to be the subtle selflessness of persons. So when we get to Prasangika, we'll leave off the permanent, partless, and permanent, partless, and independent as being the course. The person's emptiness of being self-sufficiently, substantially existent is called the gross selflessness of persons for Prasangika. Here it's the subtle selflessness of persons. The yogic middle way autonomists, the Yogacara Svatantrukas, assert that a form and a valid cognizer apprehending that form's emptiness of being different substances is a coarse selflessness of phenomena. Gross, you say gross selflessness, or what's the word? Coarse. So that means it's not as subtle. So the Satrantika Svatantrukas would not say that. They don't talk about, they say that there are external objects that are of different entity than the mind, but the Yogacara Svatantrukas, they posit a coarse selflessness of phenomena that is the coarse selflessness of phenomena, right? It's that the form and the form apprehending consciousness are empty of being different substances. The Satrantikas wouldn't say that. The Satrantika Svatantrukas. Okay? Are we okay? Okay. I wish I could see the other people to see the confusion or whatever in their eyes. But anyway, then on page 23, there we go. That's okay. You don't have to go. Just all phenomena's emptiness of true establishment is asserted to be the subtle selflessness of phenomena. So the Svatantrukas generally say that the emptiness of true existence of all phenomena is the subtle selflessness of phenomena. So how about a person? For the Svatantrukas, they talk about a subtle selflessness of person and a subtle emptiness. Here it says all phenomena's emptiness of true existence, the true establishment, is asserted to be the subtle selflessness of phenomena. Can you apply that to the person? Why not, Bob?
I mean, as I understand all these schools, they separate out phenomena and persons and treat them separately. So I mean, in the Prasangika, it's all the same, but I think, you know, like for the lower schools, they often have a subtle selflessness of a person, but don't have a subtle selflessness of phenomena. So I assume that here they're also being careful to separate how you treat persons and phenomena.
Right. So here, the object that is being negated is different when you talk about the selflessness of persons and the selflessness of phenomena. What is being negated in the person is being self-supporting, substantially existent. What is being negated when you talk about phenomena is the phenomena being truly existent. You're negating true existence. They accept inherent existence, some kind of findability, but they refute the true existence of phenomena, that they are existing truly. The two selflessnesses, the subtle selflessnesses, are differentiated by way of the object of negation and not by way of the basis of emptiness. Say, for instance, in Prasangika, as Bob was saying, what is being refuted in both cases is the emptiness of inherent existence. The person is empty of inherent existence. That's called the selflessness of persons. And the phenomena other than persons, emptiness of being inherently existent, is called the selflessness of phenomena. The two, here in the Svatantruka, the two selflessnesses are differentiated by way of the object of negation, like self-supporting substantial existent or true existence, and not by way of the basis of emptiness. Because the refutation of the object of negation, right? Object of negation in this case would be self-supporting substantially existent or true existence. That's what's being negated. How you refute that, because the refutation of the object of negation, true establishment or true existence, on the basis of a person is the subtle selflessness of phenomena. So you can apply that to persons, but that's called the subtle selflessness of phenomena. It's not called the subtle selflessness of persons for the Svatantruka. While the refutation of self-sufficient substantial existence upon the basis of a person is the subtle selflessness of persons. Subtle selflessness of persons. So you can apply, you can look at the person and determine that the person is empty of being truly existent, but that's not called the selflessness of persons, that's called the selflessness of phenomena for the Svatantruka. The two conceptions of self are differentiated by way of the mode of apprehension and not by way of the observed object. Okay, mode of apprehension is a new, when we talk about the object of the mode of apprehension, also the mode of apprehension, here the observed object we talked about, that's the thing that you're basing your investigation upon. Let's say the the person, and the mode of apprehension is that's a referent object of the person, and the mode of apprehension is how you are, the aspect in which you are conceiving of that, conceiving it to be self-supporting substantially existent, or conceiving it to be empty of true existence. The two conceptions of self are differentiated by way of the mode of apprehension, how you're apprehending them. One, you're apprehending it, selflessness of persons, you're apprehending it to be empty of a self-supporting substantial existence, and the other, your mode of apprehension is apprehending it to be empty of true existence. Not by way of the observed object. Whereas in Prasangika, the mode of apprehension is the same. You're apprehending persons and phenomena to be empty of inherent existence. That's subtle selflessness of persons and phenomena. But the observed objects are different. If you observe a person as being empty of inherent existence, that's called the selflessness of persons. If you observe phenomena other than persons, say they're aggregates, which are not the person, right? The person is what is imputed upon the aggregates. If you view their aggregates or other things, that's called the selflessness of phenomena. So they're differentiated by means of the observed object. Because through observing the basis, the person, and apprehending it to be truly established is a conception of a self of phenomena. And through observing the basis, the person, and apprehending it to be self-supporting, substantially existent, is a conception of the self of persons. So a lot of words, and if you, as an exercise, try to go in and see if you can understand what is being meant by that. I think it's what we've mentioned so far is pretty clear with respect to that. And if you have questions, you can ask next time. Let me just give this the final section here, seventh section, presentation of the grounds and paths. According to the Yogacara Svatantrukas, the difference between the persons of the three vehicles are posited in terms of three different obscurations that are the main objects of abandonment, and three different views that are the main objects of meditation. So according to the Yogacaras, there are three different ways of meditating by the different people. The hearers meditate on the selflessness of the person being empty of being self-supporting, substantially existent. The solitary realizers realize the gross selflessness of phenomena, that form and form realizing consciousness are empty of being dual, being different substances. That's their exclusive view. And that the bodhisattvas realize the emptiness of true existence. So here it says, those of the hearer lineage, having taken the conception apprehending the person to be self-supporting, substantially existent, together with its retinue, that means all of the other surrounding mental factors, as their main object of abandonment, through taking as an antidote to that, the view realizing the person to be empty of being self-sufficient, substantially existent as their main object of meditation, they attain the small enlightenment. That means the enlightenment of a hearer, which means the nirvana of a hearer. The hearer's arhatship. Those of the solitary realizer lineage, having taken the conception apprehending a form and the valid cognizer apprehending that form to be different substances as their main object of abandonment. You know, sort of the misconception for them, that's a misconception that the objects and the consciousnesses are different substances. They through taking as an antidote to that, the view realizing apprehenders and apprehendeds. Apprehenders means the subject mind, and apprehended is that which it is knowing, the objects, to be empty of being different substances as their main object of meditation, obtain the middling enlightenment. And because that object is more subtle than the selflessness of persons, it takes the solitary realizers longer than the hearers to realize their middling enlightenment. Bodhisattvas, having taken this conception of true establishment, or we would say true existence, together with its latencies as their main object of abandonment, through taking as the antidote to that the view realizing all phenomena to be lacking true existence, true establishment, as their main object of meditation, they attain the great enlightenment. And the Bodhisattvas, to support that more subtle realization, takes them 3 countless great eons to accomplish that fact, the great enlightenment, which is the enlightenment of Buddhahood. So that's the Yogacaras, Yogacara Svatantruka. Now the Satrantika Svatantrukas, the Svatantrukas that say that there are external objects, so they're not going to have the solitary realizers realizing an emptiness of form and form realizing consciousness as being different substances. That's not going to, they are different substances for them. So here, according to the Sutra Middle Way Autonomous, there is no difference between hearer and solitary realizers regarding their main objects of abandonment and main objects of meditation, because they are similar in taking the afflictive obstructions as their main object of abandonment. Here, the afflictive obstructions, another way of saying the obstructions to liberation, and that for all of these schools in general is the conceiving of the person to be self-supporting, substantially existent. That's sufficient for Svatantruka to escape from samsara. They are similar in taking the afflictive obstructions as their main objects of abandonment. And they are also similar in taking the selflessness of persons as their main object of meditation. So their selflessness of persons means this subtle selflessness of persons, according to them, person being empty of being self-supporting, substantially existent. However, there is a reason why there is a difference in the result of those two, hearers and solitary realizers, in terms of inferiority and superiority. The solitary realizers, Pratika Buddhas, are superior to the hearers. They've accumulated merit for a much longer time. It is because there is a difference in terms of the amount of merit accumulated and the strength of time spent accumulating that merit. Also, there's a subtle difference. Usually they say that the solitary realizers take as their main focus, let's say the hearers take as their main focus the Four Noble Truths, and they realize that the person is empty of being self-supporting, substantially existent. The solitary realizers take the 12 links of dependent origination as their basis, and they also realize that the person is empty of being self-supporting, substantially existent. But because of that subtler, their deeper insight into the workings of samsara, they have a greater enlightenment. They're arhatship. Okay. The autonomists, the Svatantrukas, are similar to the proponents of mind only, the Chittamatra, in asserting two types of sutras. So I guess the implication here is that the Satrantika Svatantrukas say that the bodhisattvas do take the conception of true existence together with its latencies as the main object of abandonment, and realizing the emptiness of subtle selflessness of phenomena as their main meditation. The autonomists, the Svatantrukas, are similar to the mind only, the Chittamatras, in asserting two types of sutras: the Great Vehicle Sutras and the Lesser Vehicle Sutras, and asserting two parts to the sutras: definitive and interpretable. Interpretable. So what this means is that the Chittamatrans also say that there are Hinayana Sutras and Mahayana Sutras, and amongst them, in any of those sutras, there are certain passages which can be taken as definitive, and certain passages which have to be interpreted. So, however, they are not similar in the illustrations of these, because the Chittamatrans assert that the first two turnings of the wheel of Dharma to be interpretable, and the third turning of the wheel of Dharma to be sutras of definitive meaning. So what are the three turnings of the wheel? Do you know what that means? Have you heard that before? Nadine, do you know what the three turnings of the wheel are?
So yes, I've heard many times.
So yeah, let us know then.
First turning of the wheel was the Four Noble Truths.
So the Buddha, when he went to Sarnath after achieving enlightenment, his first teachings and subsequent teachings around that time, mainly about the Four Noble Truths, okay? And then the second wheel of, and implicit in that is that the Buddha taught that phenomena were truly existent. All of these things were truly existent. Then the second turning of the wheel?
The Trijang Paramita, the Heart Sutra.
Right, one of them, the Prajnaparamita Sutras that the Buddha taught, not the same time as teaching the Four Noble Truths, maybe sometime a little bit afterwards or long time afterwards, when he taught that all phenomena are empty of inherent existence. The first turning of the wheel, based on the Four Noble Truths, implying that all phenomena are truly existent. The second wheel, that all phenomena are not truly existent, not inherently existent. And then the third wheel?
It's what the Chittamatra believe. It's about the nature of the mind. I don't know the Sanskrit word, but
Right.
Chittamatra.
So there were another set of teachings.
Uttara Tantra and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there were other sutras that were given by the Buddha where he kind of said, it looks as though from the Chittamatra and the Svatantruka point of view, it looks as though he's saying that the first two turnings of the wheel, phenomena are not all inherent, are not all truly existent. And the second turning of the wheel, they say he didn't mean, although he said that, it wasn't definitive that all phenomena are empty of being truly existent. There's some kind of middle way. Some things are truly existent, some things are not truly existent. This is when we talk about the three natures in the Chittamatra. So here, however, they are not similar in the illustrations of these, because the Chittamatrans assert the first two turnings of the wheel of Dharma to be sutras of interpretable meaning, and the third to be sutras of definitive meaning. That's what the Buddha actually meant. In this context, the first and third turnings of the wheel of Dharma are sutras of interpretable meaning. In this context, what does that mean? Svatantruka, right? Not the Chittamatra. So for the Svatantrukas, they still say that there are Hinayana sutras, Mahayana sutras. Some of them are to be some of them can be taken at face value. They're definitive, they mean what they say, and some of them have to be interpreted. But here they say the first and the third are interpretable, and the actual definitive sutras are the Prajnaparamita sutras, the second turning of the wheel. It has both interpretable and definitive portions of it. Say, for instance, in the Heart Sutra, which Nadine is familiar with, I think she's mentioned it, the Heart Sutra mentions at various points that phenomena are empty. At other points, it says that they are empty of inherent existence. So here it says it has both parts, interpretable and definitive, because those in which the qualification of ultimately is applied to the object of negation are asserted to be sutras of definitive meaning. Ultimately, phenomena are empty of inherent existence. Ultimately, they would say. Prasangika would say, you don't have to say that. Even conventionally, phenomena are empty of inherent existence. Svatantruka says that conventionally, phenomena are empty of inherent existence, but ultimately, conventionally they are not empty of inherent existence, and conventionally they are inherently existent, but ultimately they are empty of inherent existence. Because those in which the qualification ultimately is applied to the object of negation are asserted to be sutras of definitive meaning, while those of the middle turning of the wheel, in which it is not applied, are asserted to be sutras of interpretable meaning. Okay, basta. What do you say in Italy? Basta with pasta. Enough pasta. Many years in there. So before we finish, any questions? I'm sure this was not totally lucid to many of you. other than Bob, maybe, or Emily. I wanted to share with you an amusing story talking about misperceptions. You know, Lama Yeshe, when asked what was the best way for beginners to meditate on emptiness, he said, try to recognize all the times that you are mistaken, your perceptions are mistaken. So a couple of days ago, well, for the last year, I've had a cricket living in my basement, I thought, that every time I went down, it would be, I told David and Karen about this, right? It would be chirping. And I just, even when I'd go downstairs and upstairs and it would chirp, and I would chirp back thinking, you know, there's a fellow sentient being there, wayfarer. I wonder how long he or she will live. This lasted a year. And then over the weekend, maybe Wednesday or so, there was a new cricket upstairs, louder because it's closer to me, and so loud I couldn't sleep at night. And my door closed, a pillow around my ears. I didn't get any sleep that night. And then I talked to a friend in Wisconsin who knows a lot about insects and stuff. I said, or could it be a frog or an insect? Every 45 seconds it chirps 5 times, the other one chirps. And she said, you sure it's not your smoke detector? And I thought, no, that can't be. I went over upstairs and I took off the smoke detector. And indeed, the chirp was coming from it. And when I took out the batteries, the chirping stopped. And I thought, oh my gosh, that poor cricket in the basement has been chirping in response to this smoke detector upstairs. And she said, well, are you sure there's not a smoke detector downstairs? And I went downstairs, and sure enough, the smoke detector downstairs also had been chirping for the last year, all of which I thought were crickets. So, you know, maybe you've got some examples like that in your own life. You can think the things that we think of as, you know, we're so certain about are often mistaken. This is one of the principal views of the Prasangika. So next time we're going to begin, we'll take some questions about this if you finish this Svatantruka section. We'll talk about the Prasangika. So let's finish with a little short dedication. Relax your body and mind. See if you can bring back a remembering consciousness of the clear light nature of your mind. And recognize that this morning we've created some virtuous karma, which will definitely ripen in cyclic existence as some pleasurable experience. Think rather than it ripening in such a way that it might just be used once and forgotten, or even become the cause of our pride or our miserliness or whatever. Think in whatever way this ripens, may it become the cause of my continued spiritual development from life to life, up to and including the realization of renunciation, bodhicitta, the right view of emptiness, wisdom realizing emptiness, bringing about the achievement of enlightenment eventually for the sake of all sentient beings. Due to these merits, may I quickly become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings. Thank you very much. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all migrators without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme precious bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, the source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, may your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, subduer means the Muni, the Buddha, who serves as a bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplishes the magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, I beseech you, please, please live long. O Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us of intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request, O Lama, please, please live long. So thank you. Our class is diminishing in size over time, which is not unusual. I remember when we started the master's program at Instituto Lama Tsongkhapa, I think there were 85 people at the beginning. And by the time we got halfway through, it was down to about 6. And in the final days, there were just 3 or 4 of us. So it's not surprising. And you should take a certain amount of rejoicing in the fact that you have had the perseverance to chew these dry bones. This is not the only time you're going to study tenets. You will hear, when you hear them again, a presentation of tenets or parts of them in different contexts, you'll be able to get deeper into the subject because we sort of laid a little, sort of like the primer coat on the wall. You know, you think, oh, it looks nice. And then the next day, it doesn't really cover everything. Finally, when you put another coat on, or maybe even the third coat, you start to get the full presence. So thank you very much. See you next week. Take care.